From an early age, Alice Lee experienced what it means to live on the verge of poverty. She grew up in Singapore, in a family where her parents, prematurely aged by hard work, were forced to both take on several jobs at once to support the household. When Elisa was still a very young child, she was sometimes given old pencils and paper, and she would happily recreate her wildest ideas on them. An imaginary art gallery of her own, a cozy studio where she would create images of unusual birds or fantastic landscapes. Her mother would always say, "If you study, you will find a normal profession." Still, Elisa was extremely attracted to the world of art. Her school years were quite ordinary. Elisa did all her homework carefully and helped her mother prepare the food she sold. Although she liked reading books and attending exhibitions, she had little opportunity to develop in art. All her extra money went to the family's needs. When she turned 18, it turned out that it was impossible to enter an art college in Singapore without a large sum of money, which the family did not have. Elisa could not accept the fact that she would stay in the cramped room of her parents' house, working as a waitress in some eatery without any chance of career growth. One day she learned from her friends that there was an opportunity to make quick money in the United States, especially in the service or tourism business, if you speak at least some English and have a strong desire to work. She lived with this dream for a few more years. She worked part-time in coffee shops, saved some money, and talked to those who had previously left for the States. Finally, when she turned 21, she decided to take a decisive step. She applied for a visa, gathered her minimal savings, and told her family that she was going to try her luck overseas. Although her parents were worried about her, they did not interfere with this aspiration. It took 2 years of hard work before she made it to Florida. By then, Elisa was 23, and she had to put her thoughts about going to art college on hold, as her priority was to earn a living as soon as possible. When she arrived in Miami, she found the most modest apartment in a remote neighborhood where she shared with two immigrant girls. All three of them worked wherever they could, from waitressing and cleaning to manicurists, depending on who could get a job and in what field. In Elisa's case, the situation was a little better. With the help of a friend, she got a job in an elite beauty salon with a wealthy clientele, which provided a relatively decent income and sometimes generous tips. For her, this seemed like a significant step forward. For the first time in her life, she began to receive more or less stable finances. But within 6 months, it turned out that life was still difficult. She had to pay for housing, food, and clothing, and almost nothing was saved for her studies or even small savings. It seemed that even though she had a taste of a better income, the feeling of the American dream had not come. One evening, when she was working rather tired in the salon, he suddenly appeared at the door. Samir Al-Hadid, a 40-year-old man with a distinct charisma. Tall and dark, dressed in a luxurious suit, he came accompanied by two bodyguards. The salon employees were nervous because they all realized that such visitors leave huge tips. Alice was working the reception that shift, so she greeted him with a friendly smile and, not knowing who he was, signed him up for an exclusive procedure. She noticed the way he was looking at her, as if he was assessing her in a friendly way and approving at the same time. It was as if he saw her as something more than an ordinary employee. Samir stayed for a long time, ordering a number of luxurious treatments at once. In the end, he left Elisa a huge tip and whispered, "You are very polite. If you ever want a better job or seek new horizons, give me a call. I can open the whole world to you." The business card read, Samir Al-Hadid, and a phone number. At first, Elisa did not dare to dial it because she was overwhelmed by such a generous offer. Later, she asked her colleagues and learned that this man was a very wealthy businessman from Dubai, and that there were rumors that he was involved in mysterious imports and exports and invested in very expensive real estate. Everyone noticed his politeness and elegant manners, but at the same time felt that there was something mysterious behind his smile and gallantry. A few days later, Samir came to the salon again, this time with a bouquet of flowers. He asked if Elisa had time in the evening because he wanted to invite her to a private cocktail in the penthouse. She hesitated, but the idea of seeing a place that usually only wealthy Americans get to visit was in her mind. It all seemed like a fairy tale, a prince in an expensive outfit calling her to escape her everyday life. That evening, she put on her best dress, not the most expensive, but neat and elegant, and went to the address. The chic penthouse impressed her with its scale and exquisite design, a stunning view of the evening metropolis, fashionable furniture, and relaxed music. About a dozen guests in expensive clothes had gathered, discussing business matters and talking about amounts of money that were out of Alice's imagination. Samir greeted her at the entrance with a friendly smile and led her to the circle of his friends. Alice felt the envious glances of the other women. Her slim figure and Asian features looked bright and exotic for Florida. The atmosphere of the party was reminiscent of scenes from a secular movie: champagne, caviar, and live saxophone music. But among the guests, there were those who looked at her with a bit of disdain, as if trying to figure out who this new girl was in the midst of an influential person. One of the guests unconsciously mentioned some closed contracts while repeatedly throwing meaningful glances in Samir's direction, but immediately fell silent when he met his eyes with a cold stare. Elisa also felt the tension. She didn't understand what was going on, but decided to enjoy the opportunity to drink some fine wine and listen to some nice music. At the end of the reception, Samir offered to give her a ride home, but instead stopped at the beach, where they talked for an hour, gazing at the starry sky. His stories about Dubai were fascinating. The glamorous youth, the ultra-modern buildings, the huge amounts of money that turn over there every day. He spoke with such confidence and fascination, as if he were an experienced storyteller, but he never explained how he had earned his fortune. "Stay by my side," he said, "and I will give you a life you have never imagined." Elisa partly wanted to say no, because it all sounded like a fairy tale. However, the thought of stability, of being able to save money for her education and help her parents, attracted her. And when he gently leaned toward her and barely touched her hand with his lips, she felt a wave of warm excitement. Samir's charm attracted her not only because of his billions of dollars, but also because of the confidence with which he showed his willingness to take responsibility for her fate. So Alice agreed to a second meeting, and then a third, and so their romance began. Meanwhile, at the city police department, Detective Sophia Blake was methodically collecting data on illegal businesses in Florida. She had a strong hunch that the new entrepreneur from Dubai might be involved in a number of criminal cases: disappearances of local residents, dubious imports of large quantities of special materials for construction. In the evenings, Sophia spent long hours poring over financial documents and intercepted emails, where the name S. al-Hadid or similar fictitious names sometimes appeared. As the clock ticked toward the dead of night, she came across files on offshore companies where she came across the same initials again. The deeper she investigated, the more she realized that someone bigger than a local drug lord was behind it all. The next morning, she was told that an Asian girl was often around the wealthy sheikh, apparently as a lover or a close friend without official status. Sophia wondered if this girl might not know about Al-Qadid's shady dealings. But at the same time, she realized that if Elisa was involved in his personal life, she could either become a valuable informant or a person who risked getting into big trouble herself. At the time, Elisa was completely absorbed in her novel. Samir invited her to move from a cramped apartment to an expensive hotel room, and later to a luxurious apartment. According to him, this was to show care and respect. Elisa, touched by his gestures, did not doubt him too much, as she believed that she finally had a real chance for comfort and perhaps a happy ending in her life. Of course, a few friends from Florida were surprised by this sudden success, but no one officially asked her for details. Everyone believed that if a girl got a rich boyfriend, it was solely her business. At first, everything really looked like a fairy tale. Fancy dinners at the most exquisite restaurants, luxurious yacht trips, expensive gifts from Samir. However, as is often the case with people with a dubious past, his jealous manner of keeping everything under his control quickly became apparent. Alice realized that 2 or 3 guards were always following them like shadows. If she wanted to go for a walk alone, she was recommended to take one of them with her. Samir also forbade her to return to the salon where she worked before. "Why would you want to do that if I'm paying all your expenses now?" Once, when she overheard a conversation between Samir and his partner, she overheard rude phrases about eliminating and removing someone who allegedly interfered with their plans. These words were spoken in fragments, but Alice felt anxious. and the only response was his mysterious smile. It's our business slang, don't worry. But her anxiety only grew worse. That night, she couldn't sleep for a long time, thinking about how rapidly her existence had changed. A short time ago, she lived in a cramped apartment with two roommates, walking to work. And now she had a spacious apartment, money everywhere, and a man who spent it easily, but turned into a cold stranger when it came to the substance of his business. However, in the first weeks, she turned a blind eye to the suspicious moments, justifying them with peculiarities of character and the secrecy of big business. In reality, the seeds of doubt were already germinating in her, and she had little time to realize the danger she was in. A few weeks later, the disturbing details became more and more apparent. One morning when she woke up before Samir, she noticed his laptop open. The email messages mentioned cargo, the border, and new girls. Out of curiosity, she opened an attached file that talked about strange codes and large sums of money. Then it became obvious that his business was probably not transparent at all. Frightened, Elisa quickly closed the computer, but she did not have time to hide her tracks. In the evening, Samir calmly, but with a noticeable coldness in his voice, asked her what she was doing in his work documents. He spoke softly, even with a hint of mockery, but his gaze was piercing. As soon as she explained that she didn't understand, he grabbed her shoulder, squeezing it so hard that she felt pain. You do realize that it's better to stay out of my business, right? She nodded silently in response, dumbfounded by his sudden harshness. It was the first time he had ever shown aggression so openly. He looked at her as if she were prey, and his whole posture said that she shouldn't meddle where she didn't belong. From that moment on, her freedom became even more restricted. The guards practically never left her side, and new cameras appeared in the apartment, which, according to Samir, were intended for your safety. But Elisa felt more and more like a prisoner, albeit in a golden cage. Yes, she received expensive new clothes and gifts, but when she saw him rapidly dialing the phone or writing messages to his people, she felt an inner horror. She didn't want to see that icy expression in his eyes. One day she tried to find out unobtrusively what kind of medical supplies were included in his contracts. In response, she heard a cold phrase, "You'll feel better if you don't go into certain details." After that, a quarrel broke out between them. Elisa felt humiliated, and Samir, enraged, grabbed her phone and threw it against the wall, smashing it. The girl watched in tears as he looked at the broken device without any regret. "You shouldn't argue with me so quickly," he said. "Remember who I am. Everything here belongs to me, and so do you." These words sounded like an inevitable sentence. Alice realized that the matter was more serious than just her tough nature. She was caught in a strong web, and she could not get out on her own. That same night, she had a terrible dream. In it, Samir appeared as a large black snake, wrapping around her, depriving her of breath. Waking up in a cold sweat, Elisa realized that if she didn't take action, she might well end up among the missing girls she had heard about in the news. But how to escape when he hid the documents somewhere unknown and she had no money? So she had no choice but to look for a trusted person who could help. At this time, Detective Sophia Blake, a 35-year-old experienced investigator, was becoming increasingly familiar with Al-Qaid. According to her informants at the border, he was importing not only officially declared construction and luxury goods, but also some suspicious, specific products. Although this information was not enough to warrant an arrest warrant, it was enough to suggest that there were huge funds and possible human trafficking behind the other people's goods. Watching the footage from the video cameras in luxury homes and restaurants, Sophia noticed that a young girl often appeared next to Al-Hadid, presumably his mistress or girlfriend, without official status. There was little information about her, except for the name Alice Lee and the fact that she came from Singapore. The police did not have any claims against her. It seemed that the girl was most likely not an accomplice, but a victim, or at least a puppet. Sophia decided to make contact with Elisa. However, she was prevented from entering the building where she lived by security guards posted by Al-Hadid. She showed her ID several times, but was refused entry. Visits to Mr. Al-Hadid are not allowed. When it came to meeting with the girl, they started making excuses, saying that no one is held here by force, so Sophia realized that she would have to act more cunningly. In the meantime, She took testimonies from two families whose adult daughters had mysteriously disappeared. They wrote strange SMS messages to their families about going to work for a very rich man. The mothers of the missing girls, choking on tears, told of expensive gifts that suddenly appeared before their disappearance. All this led Sophia to a logical conclusion. Al-Hadid could be a direct participant in the trafficking of women. At one of the working meetings, the police noted that before conducting an official raid, it was necessary to find an inside man and obtain clear evidence. If they started without a concrete base, Al-Hadid could flee the country. Sophia realized that she had to act quickly. She focused on the idea that Elisa could become such a witness if she took the risk of cooperating. So the detective decided to wait for a convenient moment when the girl would be left without constant supervision for a while. Finally, the chance came. Samir flew to a business meeting in a neighboring state, instructing his bodyguards to keep an eye on the apartment. However, it is likely that one of them underestimated Elisa's readiness to escape, so they allowed her to go to the store to buy food. Sophia intercepted her at the checkout, introducing herself as a friend and politely asking her to step out for a minute. Elisa was frightened and at first thought it might be her angry wife or a rival. When she learned that it was a police detective, she was even more surprised. However, she gathered her courage and nodded silently. Then Sophia told her in a low voice that she was aware of Samir's criminal cases, the disappearances of the women, and was ready to get Elisa out of the trap. Fear sent a powerful tremor through her body, because how could she resist a man who had actually taken her hostage in a luxurious apartment? Sophia sighed. We can arrest him, but we need proof. If you help us, we will save you. If you don't, he can either kill you or take you somewhere else. Elisa, trembling, recalled how he had smashed her phone and threatened her. But she realized that without police support, she could neither escape nor return to normal life. Eventually, she agreed to cooperate. Sophia explained the plan. We'll connect you to a special encrypted messenger. You can use it to send everything you learn about his dealings. When we have enough data, we will detain him. The main thing is to hold on and act like you don't suspect anything. The girl nodded nervously. They quickly exchanged numbers, and Sophia disappeared into the crowd. Elisa stood with her grocery bags for a long time, trying to collect her thoughts. Hadn't she just taken a risky step? That night, Elisa decided to run away while Samir was away. She jumped up, grabbed her suitcase, and began to hastily pack. However, one of the guards appeared at the door with a telling question. Where are you going? His voice sounded cold. The girl embarrassedly began to justify herself, saying that she had to go home urgently. But the man only gave her a skeptical look. Mr. Al-Hadid knows your every move. Don't do anything stupid. In the morning, Samir himself arrived. Apparently, the security guard had already told him about Elisa's attempt to do something. Outraged, he confronted her in the living room. Did you plan to run away from me? Do you think it's that easy? You should be grateful for everything I do for you, not betray me. The girl's heart was in terror. In the midst of the quarrel, he grabbed her hand and squeezed it hard, then broke the nearest vase. You are mine, do you understand? His voice rang out, full of uncontrollable rage that is difficult to describe in words. The girl could barely hold back her tears, agreeing to everything just to avoid being beaten or worse. A thought was running through her mind. I'm trapped, but I have to do something different. Late in the evening, when Samir had fallen asleep, Elisa connected to the encrypted channel on the secret phone she had received from Sophia. She wrote a short message. I'm not allowed out, but I can try to find evidence. I need time. Over the next few days, Elisa sneaked around every nook and cranny of the apartment, trying to memorize small details and take pictures of important papers. The risk was enormous, but she saw no other way out. Sometimes the guards would voluntarily offer her to carry packages or walk her to the car Samir was using. Elisa would put on a smile, radiate fake trust and love so as not to arouse suspicion. But deep down, she was worried that they would discover her spying activities, that they were constantly monitoring her correspondence. Meanwhile, Samir was becoming increasingly irritable. He often answered the phone with harsh phrases, sometimes in English with a strong accent, sometimes in Arabic. I decide when and where to go. Or, if the pressure continues, I will solve this problem. Elisa guessed that they were talking about big, dark deals. And although she sent snippets of information to Sophia every day, the police did not want to rush into a raid. Samir could have patrons who could quickly destroy all traces or help him escape. He must have had a backup plan, and without indisputable facts, the court could have acquitted him. One evening, Elisa cautiously mentioned that she would like to go back to work, allegedly because she was bored inside the four walls. But Samir responded sharply, "Don't you argue too much lately? You have everything: clothes, food, money, freedom. What other work is there?" His eyes clearly showed that he did not consider her free. Elisa realized that no amount of talking about friendly treatment would work. For him, she was his property. This conversation almost broke her morale. However, she did not forget Sophia's words. Only evidence will put him away. Otherwise, Elisa could have faced either a swift reprisal or, even worse, a transfer to unknown hands. It was in these thoughts that she immersed herself every night, waking up from nightmares over and over again. Time passed, and Elisa continued to send the police more and more detailed information about Samir's meetings, taking pictures of documents and bank accounts whenever the guards turned away for even a minute. Each such step threatened her life. Once, she even used Samir's phone while he was in the shower to take screenshots of messages. The girl wanted to delete her traces, but in her haste she missed one open tab, but she was lucky. He didn't notice it at first. Eventually, Detective Sophia informed him that the data Elisa provided was enough for a large-scale operation. The most compelling argument was that Samir was going to flee Florida soon. Large financial flows had already begun to move offshore, indicating that he was preparing to escape. There were rumors that he was transporting drugs by sea, and that his goods might include live people who were planned to be transported for trafficking. When Samir announced that they had to leave the port for the open sea within 24 hours, Elisa realized that this was her last chance to make a difference. She gave Sophia a detailed schedule, the time of the planned departure, the composition of the team, and even the approximate number of packages of drugs. The police began to prepare a special operation, but there was a problem. Samir's bodyguards were armed and alert, and there was no time to delay. Night fell. Samir hurriedly packed his things, ordering Elisa to take the minimum. After all, there was no need for excess luggage in sea conditions. The girl, trembling with nerves, realized that if the police did not intervene now, she would either be outside the jurisdiction of the United States or die. When their entire group arrived at the port, everything looked ordinary. A few containers, a yacht shaded by distant spotlights, and a general atmosphere of tension. Sophia and her team disguised themselves nearby on boats. According to the plan, as soon as the criminals started loading the prohibited packages, the special forces were to block the yacht and arrest the crew. Elisa, standing next to Samir on the deck, could barely keep herself from panicking as she watched his assistants carry bags of unknown products. In her mind, every step echoed with a painful thought. This is a crime. This is smuggling. He is a murderer. Suddenly, the plan went awry. One of the guards was scrolling through Samir's smartphone for contacts or messages and came across a saved screenshot of a conversation with Sophia. Everything became clear. "She betrayed us," he shouted and rushed to his boss. Elisa instantly realized that a terrible rage was about to erupt. Indeed, Samir immediately grabbed a gun, held her arm, and ordered the crew, "Close everything! This girl is a spy!" Panic ensued. The police, hearing the guards' premature screams over their radios, were forced to intensify the assault immediately. Special forces rolled out of several high-speed boats, and a helicopter shone a blinding beam on the yacht. Samir's bodyguards opened fire, and the police responded in kind. Bullets whistled, and desperate shouts were heard. Samir, seeing the police surroundings, pulled Elisa toward him in desperation and put the muzzle of the gun to her chest. "Did you plan all this? You betrayed me," he said with hatred, and the girl, barely breathing through her tears, whispered, "You ruined my life. I had no other choice." Sophia, standing on one of the boats, shouted into the loudspeaker, "Samir al-Hadid, drop your weapon and release the hostage." But in response, he only took even stronger aim at Alice. "If I lose, she'll go with me," he said, his mouth full of insane rage. At the decisive moment, he pulled the trigger. A loud shot rang out, and it was as if a fire of pain erupted in Elisa's chest. Her legs gave out, and she fell to the wooden deck, bleeding. Police officers immediately rushed to the ship. One shot Samir in the leg, while others quickly broke his arms. The guards partially surrendered and were partially neutralized in a short firefight. Sophia, whose heart was almost jumping out of her chest, ran to the wounded girl. But she was no longer responding. Her eyes were closing, her breathing was becoming ragged, and the bleeding wound was too serious. "Hold on, don't give up," called Sophia. But she realized that there was little chance. In a matter of seconds, Elisa was gone. In the last glare of the spotlight, her eyes froze and went out forever. And Samir, kneeling on his knees with his hands tied and his face twisted with rage, only said hoarsely, "It was supposed to belong to me." And at that moment, he was forcibly taken away under armed guard. The subsequent investigation revealed the full scale of the criminal scheme. Evidence of money laundering, drug trafficking, and worst of all, evidence of his involvement in illegal human trafficking was found in Samir's estates and yachts. Several girls were rescued from different places and told about the violence. The testimony of the hired helpers who confessed to the murders, as well as the files that Elisa had collected before her death, formed the final basis for the prosecution. The trial was high profile, with journalists from different states and even from abroad. Excerpts from photographs, messages, and camera footage from the yacht were shown in the courtroom, capturing the last seconds of Alice's life at gunpoint. Shock and outrage reigned among the audience. Although Samir's defense consisted of the most expensive lawyers, they failed to convincingly refute the obvious. He pulled the trigger himself. The prosecutor described in detail how Al-Hadid ran a large organization that made money from drug trafficking and human trafficking. People who were looking for work or better prospects were actually lured away and used as hostages or taken abroad. Alice, in her tragic death, managed to destroy this system at the same time. The information she provided finally proved the extent of the empire. After careful consideration, the judge handed down a sentence of life imprisonment without any possibility of commutation. There was a round of applause in the courtroom, and the relatives of the victims tearfully expressed at least some relief. During the announcement of the verdict, Samir looked forward in silence. He smiled arrogantly at the cameras only once, but he had to accept the irreversibility of reality. His time of impunity had come to an end, and he would spend a long life behind bars. After talking to journalists, Sophia gave only a brief assessment. "It is a pity that victory required a sacrifice in the person of Alice Lee. She was talented and deserved a long life, but her trust in an illusory savior ruined her. However, it was thanks to her that we got the path to justice." The question of whether Elisa could have been saved if the police had intervened earlier, or if she had made a quicker decision, remained unanswered. Later, a small memorial was set up in the port area where the yacht once stood. Candles and flowers dedicated to Elisa's memory. Sometimes tourists stop at the plaque that briefly explains her heroic role and silently reflect on the horrors that fell to the lot of a young woman who, in fact, simply wanted a better life. The case caused a significant resonance in Florida, highlighting the corrupt schemes among officials who covered up Al-Qaeda's dubious operations. Officials were investigated and dismissed. For the United States, this became a model of how a seemingly ordinary event can reveal an international criminal chain if there is a brave soul who can provide key evidence. Alice Lee's name appeared frequently in the newspapers. A 23-year-old Singaporean girl who, trapped in a trap, chose justice and paid with her life for her secret data. Hashtags in support of her were circulated on social media, and human rights activists called for greater protection for migrants who, because of their desire for quick success, easily become targets of fraudulent or criminal schemes. Ultimately, this story shows that behind the glitter and splendor often lies a dark abyss, and that unconditional trust sometimes ends in disaster. For Alice's family in Singapore, the tragic news from Florida came as a terrible blow, although it was said that her action saved the lives of other potential victims. The state authorities provided some compensation, but no amount of money could bring their daughter back. As a result, the case file remained in the police archives, and the memory of Floridians is a warning of how dangerous the fairy tale promises of people with a luxurious image can be. Alice, who dreamed only of a happy ending, became a symbol of how one bad decision can lead to the brink of the abyss, and at the same time demonstrated how powerful courage can be when the fate of others is at stake.